Evelyn Carrington thought humiliating a quiet woman at the most exclusive charity auction in Manhattan would make her look powerful. But before the night was over, the same ballroom that applauded her cruelty would stand in frozen silence as her entire reputation collapsed in front of America's wealthiest elite. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Rain shimmered across the streets of Midtown Manhattan as black luxury SUVs lined the entrance of the Grand Arcadia Hotel, a 40-story palace of marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and velvet silence where billionaires gathered for the annual Starlight Children's Charity Auction. Men in tailored tuxedos stepped onto the red carpet beside women draped in diamonds worth more than most American homes. Camera flashes burst nonstop beneath the gold awning while reporters called out names tied to Wall Street, Hollywood, and Washington power circles. Then a faded yellow taxi pulled quietly to the curb. The driver stepped out first, holding an umbrella over a woman wearing a simple cream sweater beneath a charcoal wool coat. No designer logo. No jewelry except a silver watch with worn leather straps. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She paid the cab driver with a soft smile, thanked him by name after reading his ID card, and walked toward the entrance with calm, steady eyes. Several guests glanced at her briefly before looking away with polite confusion. She didn't belong in their version of wealth. At the top of the marble staircase stood Evelyn Carrington, president of the Gala Committee and one of Manhattan's most feared social figures. Her icy blonde hair framed a face perfected by expensive restraint, and her emerald gown caught the chandelier light like glass. Beside her stood Damien Vale, the celebrity auctioneer famous for turning charity events into performances for the ultra-rich. He noticed Clara immediately. Interesting choice for tonight, Damien muttered with a smirk as Clara approached the velvet rope. Evelyn's eyes moved slowly over Clara's coat, her shoes, then the old taxi still pulling away from the curb. The corner of her mouth tightened. "Excuse me," Evelyn said sharply, stepping forward before Clara could enter. "Staff access is around the side entrance." The nearby guests chuckled softly. Clara blinked once, but remained calm. "I'm here for the auction," she replied gently. Evelyn let out a quiet laugh, meant to be overheard. "Of course you are." Damien turned slightly toward the crowd, amused already. "Do you happen to have an invitation, ma'am?" Clara reached into her coat pocket slowly while flashes from photographers lit the marble staircase around her. But before she could answer, Evelyn lifted a hand to stop her. "Actually," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "this event requires a minimum donation pledge of $250,000 just to attend." A hush of curiosity spread through the entrance line. Clara's expression never changed. "I understand," she said softly. Damien folded his arms, smiling now. "Then this should be very simple," he said. "Tell us your name, and let's see if anyone inside is expecting you." The smile on Damien Vale's face widened as the surrounding guests leaned closer, eager for entertainment disguised as sophistication. Clara Whitmore stood beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers with one hand still inside her coat pocket, calm enough to make Evelyn Carrington strangely uncomfortable. Most people became defensive when embarrassed publicly. Clara did not. That silence irritated Evelyn more than anger ever could. "Well?" Damien asked, tilting his head with theatrical patience. "Your name?" Clara slowly removed a cream-colored invitation envelope from her coat and handed it toward him. Before Damien could take it, Evelyn intercepted it first. Her polished fingernails brushed against the thick paper as she opened it with deliberate slowness. Several nearby donors watched openly now, champagne glasses frozen near their lips. The soft jazz music from inside the ballroom continued behind them, but near the entrance, a hush had settled over the marble staircase. Evelyn scanned the invitation once, then twice. A faint crease appeared between her eyebrows. "Interesting," she said. "No sponsor name attached." Damien chuckled lightly. "A guest pass." Evelyn handed the card to him. "Looks like someone in administration made an error." A few people laughed quietly. Clara finally spoke again. "There is no mistake." Her voice was soft but steady. Damien examined the invitation under the chandelier light. The embossed gold seal was authentic. That bothered him. "Who invited you?" he asked. Clara met his eyes without hesitation. "I was invited personally." Evelyn crossed her arms. "By whom?" Clara paused for only a second. "The board." That answer triggered visible amusement from the guests nearby. One older investor nearly coughed into his drink, trying not to laugh. "The board," Evelyn repeated loudly enough for people entering behind them to hear. "Do you even know who sits on this board?" Clara remained composed. "Yes." The simplicity of her answer somehow made the moment even more awkward. Nathan Holloway stood several feet away near the press barrier, watching the exchange unfold while pretending to check notes on his phone. Something about Clara's face felt familiar to him, though he could not place it. He had spent 15 years covering finance and philanthropy in New York, and instinct told him this situation was turning uglier than necessary. Still, he said nothing. Around them, more guests slowed their steps to watch. Some whispered behind practiced smiles. Others openly stared at Clara's modest coat and sensible shoes like evidence in a courtroom. Evelyn noticed the growing audience and subtly straightened her posture. Public humiliation had become performance now. "You understand," she said with polished cruelty. "This is not a community fundraiser. The people in that ballroom donate millions of dollars every year." Clara nodded once. "I understand." "Then perhaps," Evelyn continued, "you also understand why security takes appearances seriously." The sentence landed exactly as intended. A few uncomfortable smiles spread through the crowd. Nathan glanced toward Clara, expecting embarrassment or retreat. Instead, she simply folded her hands in front of her. Her eyes never wavered. Damien suddenly stepped down one marble stair closer to her, lowering his voice just enough to sound insulting instead of aggressive. "Listen," he said. "If someone gave you that invitation as a joke, now would be the perfect time to leave with dignity." Clara looked at him quietly for a long moment. "I came here for the children this auction claims to help," she replied. "Nothing else." For the first time, the laughter around them weakened slightly. Even Evelyn sensed the shift and immediately pushed harder. "Fine," she said sharply. "If you truly belong here, then this should be simple." She turned toward the security staff near the doorway and raised her voice so the entire entrance could hear her next words clearly. "Before this woman enters the ballroom, I want proof of her donation history and financial authorization displayed publicly for verification." For several long seconds, nobody moved. The rain outside continued tapping softly against the towering glass windows while the tension at the hotel entrance thickened beneath the chandeliers. Clara Whitmore stood alone at the center of it, surrounded by silk gowns, diamond earrings, and amused expressions that treated her like an interruption instead of a guest. Evelyn Carrington lowered her hand slowly after issuing the demand, satisfied by the uncomfortable silence spreading through the crowd. "Surely," she said with polished elegance, "someone attending an event of this caliber would not object to transparency." A few people nodded immediately, eager to align themselves with authority. One man near the staircase smirked into his bourbon glass. "This should be interesting," he muttered. Damien Vale sensed the crowd leaning into the spectacle now, and his showman instincts took over. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced lightly, spreading one arm toward Clara as if introducing entertainment before the main event. "It appears we have a mystery donor among us tonight." Quiet laughter rippled through the entrance hall. Clara's expression remained composed, though her fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her leather handbag. Nathan Holloway watched carefully from near the press area. Something about her restraint bothered him more than anger would have. Most people publicly embarrassed by Manhattan elites either exploded or collapsed. Clara did neither. She simply stood there with calm eyes, as though she had already survived far worse than social humiliation. A young hotel employee stepped nervously toward Evelyn, holding a tablet connected to the guest database. "Ma'am," he whispered, "her invitation code is valid." Evelyn did not even look at him. "Then pull up the donor records." The employee hesitated. "Some donor files are private." Evelyn's jaw tightened beneath her smile. "Not tonight." The surrounding guests exchanged curious glances. The atmosphere no longer felt like an elegant charity gala. It felt like a courtroom designed for public entertainment. Clara finally spoke again, her voice soft enough that people instinctively leaned closer to hear. "There are children waiting for funding from this event," she said. I do not think humiliating people at the door reflects very well on the mission. Evelyn gave a thin smile. And I do not think anonymous strangers belong inside rooms built on trust. The sentence drew another wave of approving murmurs. Nathan noticed Clara glance briefly toward the ballroom doors behind Evelyn. Just for a second, her eyes rested on a framed photograph displayed beside the entrance. It showed St. Jude Children's Hospital receiving a massive donation 3 years earlier. Beneath the image sat a silver plaque listing contributors. Most guests walked past it without noticing. Clara did not. Her gaze lingered there with quiet familiarity before returning to Evelyn. Nathan followed her eyes toward the plaque. One donor name near the bottom had been partially hidden behind floral decorations. Whitmore Horizon Foundation. His brow furrowed slightly. Before he could process the connection, Damien stepped closer to Clara with renewed confidence. "You know," he said with a grin, "real philanthropists usually arrive in something more impressive than a taxi." Several guests laughed openly now. Clara looked at him steadily. "Some people spend money to be seen," she replied. "Others spend it where it matters." The laughter weakened instantly. Damien's smile faltered for the briefest moment before returning sharper than before. Evelyn noticed it too. She could feel control slipping inch by inch, and that made her dangerous. Across the lobby, Vivian Mercer had quietly arrived near the back of the crowd. The older woman stood beside a marble column wrapped in silver orchids, observing everything in silence. The moment her eyes landed on Clara, her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not surprise, recognition, but she said nothing. Evelyn suddenly turned toward the staff with decisive authority. "Enough of this." She looked directly at Clara, her voice rising so the entire entrance hall could hear every word clearly. "If you truly belong among the donors tonight, then you will have no problem proving it publicly in front of everyone." She gestured toward the massive digital display screen inside the ballroom entrance where donor rankings rotated beside live auction numbers. Damien's grin returned immediately as he understood what she intended. And for the first time that evening, even some members of the crowd began shifting uncomfortably as Evelyn prepared to display Clara's financial records for the entire gala to see. The massive digital display beside the ballroom doors flickered softly as hotel staff hesitated near the controls, unsure whether they were witnessing a charity gala or a public execution disguised in designer clothing. Clara Whitmore stood motionless beneath the crystal light, while dozens of wealthy guests gathered closer, drawn by the irresistible gravity of humiliation happening to someone who appeared powerless. Evelyn Carrington folded her arms elegantly, every inch of her posture radiating social authority. "Go ahead," she told the staff coldly. "If Miss Whitmore truly belongs here, transparency should not offend her." The young employee holding the tablet swallowed nervously. "Ma'am, some donor accounts are protected under private foundation agreements." "Then she can verify herself verbally," Evelyn replied immediately, never taking her eyes off Clara. "How much exactly have you donated to pediatric charities this year?" The question echoed louder than expected through the marble entrance hall. Nearby conversations faded completely. Even the waiters carrying silver trays slowed their movements. Clara remained calm, though the pressure surrounding her had become suffocating. Damien Vale stepped beside Evelyn with the polished confidence of a man enjoying the performance too much to stop it. "Surely a serious donor would know the answer instantly," he said smoothly. "Unless, of course, this invitation found its way into the wrong hands." A few guests laughed again, but softer this time. The mood had shifted. What began as amusement now carried discomfort beneath it. Nathan Holloway noticed it clearly. People were no longer entertained because Clara looked ridiculous. They were entertained because they sensed cruelty and did not know whether to intervene or protect their own place in the room. Clara finally answered in the same measured tone she had used all evening. "I do not discuss charitable giving as a performance." Evelyn's expression hardened instantly. "How convenient." Clara looked directly at her. "Children in hospitals do not care whose name is printed on ballroom screens." For one brief second, silence fell across the entrance. Even Damien lost his smile. The words landed too honestly inside a room built almost entirely on appearances. Then Evelyn recovered. "And yet," she said sharply, "every major donor here tonight understands accountability." She gestured toward the ballroom beyond the glass doors where giant gold letters displayed sponsor rankings above the auction stage. This event is funded by people who earned their place in that room. Clara's eyes moved slowly toward the ballroom. Hundreds of candles flickered beyond the doorway beside towering floral arrangements and tables draped in ivory silk. Somewhere inside, an orchestra continued playing, unaware of the humiliation unfolding outside. Earned, Clara repeated quietly. Nathan noticed something then. The older silver watch on Clara's wrist had shifted beneath her sleeve as she folded her hands again. Engraved on the back was the same symbol printed on the hidden plaque near the St. Jude photograph. Whitmore Horizon Foundation. His chest tightened slightly. Suddenly fragments of memory began colliding in his mind. A private donor. Anonymous pediatric grants. Emergency hospital funding during the Chicago winter crisis. He stared at Clara again, but before he could speak, Evelyn took another step forward. I think we have delayed our guests long enough. Two uniformed security guards approached carefully from the lobby corridor. They did not look aggressive, only uncomfortable. Clara glanced at them briefly, then back at Evelyn. You are asking me to leave? She asked softly. Evelyn lifted her chin. I am asking you to respect the standards of this event. Clara gave the faintest nod, as if accepting something sad but unsurprising. Then she said the one sentence that caused several people nearby to lower their eyes in embarrassment. It is always interesting, she said calmly, when rooms built for charity become places where kindness is the least welcome thing inside them. The words hung in the chandelier light like quiet judgment. Nobody answered. Even the orchestra music from inside suddenly felt distant. One of the security guards shifted awkwardly, clearly ashamed to continue. But Evelyn refused to retreat now. Her pride had carried her too far. She extended one hand toward the hotel doors with cold finality. Miss Whitmore, she announced loudly enough for the entire entrance to hear. You need to leave the property immediately before we escort you out ourselves. For a long moment after Evelyn Carrington demanded that Clara Whitmore leave the property, nobody in the entrance hall spoke. The crystal chandeliers glowed above them while soft orchestra music drifted from the ballroom beyond the glass doors, creating a strange contrast to the humiliation hanging heavily in the air. Clara stood quietly between the two security guards, her cream sweater slightly damp from the rain outside, her silver watch catching faint reflections of candlelight. She did not look angry. Somehow, that made the scene even harder to watch. One of the guards, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and graying hair, shifted awkwardly before speaking under his breath. Ma'am, he said gently, I am sorry about this. Clara turned toward him with surprising warmth. You are doing your job, she replied softly. Please do not apologize for someone else's choices. The man lowered his eyes immediately, visibly affected by her kindness. Nathan Holloway watched from near the staircase, unable to shake the growing feeling that something deeply wrong was unfolding in front of him. Across the lobby, Vivian Mercer remained silent beside the marble column, her expression unreadable as she studied Clara carefully. Evelyn, meanwhile, appeared almost relieved now that she had regained control of the room. Thank you, she told the guards crisply. Let us proceed with the evening. Clara slowly picked up her handbag from beside her feet. Her movements were calm, unhurried, almost graceful against the tension surrounding her. Several guests avoided looking directly at her now. Others stared openly, wrestling with discomfort they did not want to admit. As Clara turned toward the entrance doors, Nathan suddenly noticed a small folded photograph slip partially from her handbag onto the marble floor. Before anyone else saw it, the older security guard bent quickly and picked it up. His expression changed when he glanced at the image. It showed a little girl in a hospital bed smiling beside Clara. Across the bottom, written in faded blue marker, were the words, "Thank you for giving me another birthday." Clara accepted the photograph carefully when he handed it back. For the first time that evening, emotion flickered quietly behind her composed expression. "My daughter?" the guard asked before stopping himself awkwardly. Clara looked at the picture for a brief second. "No," she answered softly. "A patient." Something inside the atmosphere shifted then. Not dramatically, just enough for people to stop smiling. Clara tucked the photograph back into her bag. "I promised her I would continue helping children like her," she said quietly. "That is why I came tonight." The words carried no accusation, no attempt to shame anyone. that made them infinitely heavier. Nathan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Even Damien Vale no longer looked amused. Evelyn, however, hardened further beneath the pressure of the crowd's changing mood. Pride would not allow her to retreat now. "A touching story," she said coolly. "But sentiment does not replace standards." Clara nodded gently. "No," she replied. "Character does." Silence fell again. The orchestra music beyond the ballroom doors seemed strangely distant now, drowned beneath the weight of what had just been said. Clara stepped toward the exit as the rain outside shimmered against the giant hotel windows like silver streaks across black glass. Her reflection moved faintly across the polished marble floors while wealthy strangers watched a woman leave with more dignity than anyone still standing inside. Then it happened. From outside the hotel entrance came the low hum of multiple engines approaching the curb at once. Not loud, not aggressive, but unmistakably expensive. The valet staff near the doors suddenly straightened in confusion. Headlights swept across the marble walls through the rain-soaked windows. One valet whispered something under his breath before rushing toward the entrance. Another employee nearly dropped the silver tray he was carrying. And for the first time all evening, Evelyn Carrington's confident expression faltered as the sound of several black luxury vehicles pulling up outside changed the atmosphere in the lobby instantly. The sound of the engines outside rolled through the hotel entrance with quiet authority, low and controlled, the kind of sound that belonged to people who never needed to announce their importance. Every valet near the front doors suddenly moved faster. The heavy glass entrance swung open as rain-cooled air drifted into the marble lobby, carrying the scent of wet pavement and Manhattan night. One black SUV stopped directly beneath the golden awning, followed by two more behind it. No flashing lights, no dramatic convoy, just understated power. Conversations throughout the entrance faded almost instantly. Clara Whitmore paused near the doorway, but did not turn around immediately. She simply stood there holding her handbag while reflections from the rain shimmered softly across the polished floor beneath her feet. Then the rear passenger door of the first SUV opened. A tall older man stepped out wearing a dark navy overcoat over a charcoal suit. His silver hair was damp from the rain, but his posture carried effortless authority. Several guests near the entrance recognized him instantly. One donor nearly choked on his champagne. Another whispered in disbelief, "That is Arthur Bennett." Nathan Holloway's eyes widened immediately. Arthur Bennett was not merely wealthy. He was one of the most influential philanthropic financiers in America, chairman of Bennett Global Health Systems, and advisor to multiple national pediatric initiatives. More importantly, he almost never attended public events personally. Yet now he walked through the rain toward the entrance of the Grand Arcadia Hotel with the unmistakable focus of a man who knew exactly why he was there. The valet staff opened the doors quickly as Bennett entered the lobby. Water droplets glimmered briefly on his coat beneath the chandelier light. Behind him followed two assistants carrying folders and digital tablets. The entire energy inside the entrance hall changed instantly. Evelyn Carrington straightened at once, forcing a polished smile back onto her face. "Mr. Bennett," she said brightly, moving forward. "What an unexpected honor." But Arthur Bennett barely acknowledged her. His eyes moved through the crowd until they landed directly on Clara Whitmore, standing quietly near the exit doors. The tension in the room became almost physical. Clara finally turned toward him calmly. Bennett's serious expression softened immediately. "Clara," he said warmly, "I have been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. A hush swept through the crowd. Damien Vale visibly froze beside Evelyn. Nathan stared at Clara in stunned silence as fragments of recognition slammed together in his mind all at once. Whitmore Horizon Foundation. Anonymous pediatric funding. Emergency hospital grants. Clara Whitmore. Dear God. Evelyn attempted a nervous laugh. "You know each other?" Arthur Bennett looked at her for the first time then, and something in his eyes made her confidence falter instantly. "Know each other," he repeated quietly. "Miss Whitmore personally financed the pediatric wing my foundation could not afford to complete last year." Complete silence. Nobody moved. Nobody even touched their drinks. Bennett stepped closer to Clara with unmistakable respect. "The board has been waiting for you inside," he continued. "The final auction item cannot proceed without your approval." Damien's face lost color visibly. Evelyn blinked rapidly, trying to process what she was hearing. Approval, she whispered. Nathan looked toward the ballroom doors as realization spread across his face. Clara was not a guest. She was the primary benefactor. One of the assistants beside Bennett quickly opened a digital tablet displaying donor authorizations and sponsorship agreements. At the very top appeared the name Whitmore Horizon Foundation beside a funding commitment larger than every visible sponsor combined. Several guests exchanged stunned glances. Some immediately looked away from Clara in embarrassment, remembering their laughter only minutes earlier. Clara remained completely composed through all of it. No anger, no satisfaction, just quiet dignity. Evelyn finally found her voice again, though it sounded smaller now. There must be some misunderstanding, she said carefully. We were simply following protocol. Arthur Bennett's expression turned cold enough to freeze the room. He glanced once toward the security guards standing beside Clara, then toward the giant donor screen near the ballroom entrance where Evelyn had nearly displayed Clara's records publicly moments earlier. When he spoke again, his voice was calm, controlled, and devastatingly precise. You asked the most important donor in this building to leave her own charity auction. The silence inside the Grand Arcadia Hotel became so complete that even the orchestra music from the ballroom seemed to disappear beneath it. Evelyn Carrington stood frozen beneath the chandelier light, her carefully rehearsed confidence unraveling in front of Manhattan's wealthiest donors. Damian Vale stared at the digital tablet in Arthur Bennett's assistant's hands as though the numbers displayed there could not possibly be real. But they were. Whitmore Horizon Foundation. Primary underwriting sponsor. Pediatric Expansion Initiative. $40 million commitment. Clara Whitmore remained near the entrance doors exactly as she had been all evening, calm and composed while the room around her transformed completely. Nathan Holloway finally stepped forward from the press area, his voice quieter now, almost stunned by his own realization. I knew I recognized your name, he said. Several guests immediately turned toward him. Nathan swallowed hard before continuing. 3 years ago, during the Chicago pediatric emergency shortage, every major donor backed out after the market crash. He looked directly at Clara. Your foundation covered the entire funding gap overnight. Murmurs spread rapidly through the crowd. Arthur Bennett nodded once. And she did it anonymously, he added. Because she refused to let hospitals waste time organizing publicity events while children were waiting for treatment. Evelyn's face drained of color. Clara lowered her eyes briefly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention now surrounding her. One of the women near the staircase suddenly spoke up in disbelief. Wait, she whispered. Whitmore Horizon funded St. Jude West too. Another donor slowly nodded. And the Seattle Neonatal Centers. A third voice joined in quietly. My nephew's cancer program survived because of her grants. The realization moved through the ballroom entrance like a wave. People who had laughed at Clara's coat minutes earlier were now looking at her with stunned respect and growing shame. Even the security guards standing nearby appeared shaken by what they were hearing. Then Vivian Mercer finally stepped away from the marble column where she had silently observed the entire evening. The older woman approached Clara slowly before stopping in front of her with visible emotion in her eyes. You paid for my granddaughter's surgery 2 years ago, Vivian said softly. Several guests gasped quietly. Vivian's voice trembled slightly as she continued. You told the hospital to list the donation as community assistance so my daughter would not feel embarrassed accepting help. Clara immediately reached for Vivian's hand. Your granddaughter deserved dignity, she replied gently. Not debt. The room went silent again. Nathan looked around at the faces of Manhattan elites, standing speechless beneath the crystal chandeliers. A few lowered their eyes entirely now. Others looked openly devastated by how quickly they had judged her. Evelyn finally tried to speak, though her voice lacked all its earlier authority. Miss Whitmore, if there has been a misunderstanding tonight, I sincerely apologize. Arthur Bennett turned toward her sharply, but Clara spoke before he could answer. No, she said softly. There is no need for humiliation. That sentence struck the room harder than anger ever could have. Clara looked calmly toward the giant donor screen near the ballroom doors where Evelyn had nearly exposed her records publicly less than an hour earlier. People make assumptions, she continued. Sometimes fear of losing status makes kindness difficult. Damian lowered his gaze completely. Nathan could see genuine shame spreading across several faces in the crowd now. But Clara did not use the moment to destroy anyone. She simply carried herself with the same quiet grace she had shown when they believed she was powerless. Arthur Bennett studied her for a long second before speaking carefully. There is something else they should know. Clara looked at him almost warningly, but Bennett continued anyway. The Whitmore Horizon Foundation does not just sponsor this auction. He paused. Clara Whitmore created the entire pediatric relief network this gala was built to support. Audible shocks spread through the entrance hall. Nathan stared at Clara in disbelief. Evelyn physically stepped backward. Bennett's voice remained calm and precise. For the last 7 years, every major children's initiative connected to this event has existed because she funded it before anyone else was willing to help. Nobody spoke after that. The same people who had treated Clara like an outsider now stood facing the woman who had quietly changed thousands of lives while asking for nothing in return. And for the first time all evening, nobody in that marble ballroom looked at Clara Whitmore as someone who did not belong there. The atmosphere inside the Grand Arcadia Hotel no longer resembled the glittering social spectacle it had been an hour earlier. The laughter was gone. So were the careless whispers and amused smiles. Beneath the crystal chandeliers, Manhattan's elite stood in heavy silence, while Clara Whitmore remained near the ballroom entrance with quiet composure, the same woman they had nearly forced into the rain moments before. Arthur Bennett closed the digital tablet slowly and handed it back to his assistant. Nobody seemed interested in the auction anymore. The real lesson of the evening had already happened in the lobby. Evelyn Carrington looked visibly shaken now, her carefully polished image cracked by the realization that every cruel word she had spoken had been directed at the very person who built the foundation of the gala itself. "Miss Whitmore," she said softly, struggling to maintain her composure, "I accept full responsibility for what happened tonight." Clara looked at her calmly. "Responsibility matters," she replied gently. "But what matters more is what happens after." Evelyn lowered her eyes for the first time all evening. Around them, guests who once avoided Clara were now approaching carefully, almost respectfully. One donor quietly apologized for laughing earlier. Another admitted he had judged her instantly based on appearance alone. Clara accepted each apology with grace, but never allowed the moment to become cruel or humiliating in return. Nathan Holloway watched the entire scene with disbelief. He had covered scandals, mergers, political collapses, and billionaire rivalries for years, but he had never seen power handled the way Clara handled it now. No revenge, no public destruction, just dignity strong enough to make everyone else examine themselves. Arthur Bennett finally spoke again. "The board is prepared to remove several members from gala leadership immediately," he said carefully, glancing toward Evelyn and Damien. "That will not be necessary," Clara interrupted softly. The room turned toward her again. Damien looked stunned. Evelyn blinked in confusion. Clara folded her hands calmly in front of her. "Humiliation rarely teaches people anything valuable," she said. "But accountability can." She turned toward the ballroom doors where the giant donor screen still glowed above the stage. "If this event truly exists to help children," she continued, "then it should begin acting like it." Nathan noticed several guests nodding slowly now. Clara then looked directly at the young hotel employee who had quietly tried to warn Evelyn earlier that her invitation was valid. "What is your name?" she asked kindly. The nervous employee straightened immediately. "Ethan, ma'am." Clara smiled faintly. "Ethan, thank you for trying to do the right thing even when it was difficult." The young man looked overwhelmed. Arthur Bennett exchanged a glance with one of his assistants before speaking. "Whitmore Horizon has been expanding its scholarship and leadership program," he said. "I believe we may have a place for someone with integrity." Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief. Across the lobby, one of the security guards quietly smiled for the first time all evening. Clara then turned back toward Evelyn and Damien. The silence surrounding them felt different now. Not hostile, reflective. "Starting tonight," Clara said calmly, "every guest attending future Whitmore Horizon events will enter anonymously." Several people looked confused. Clara continued. "No sponsor rankings. No public donation displays. No VIP entry lines." She glanced once toward the giant donor board above the ballroom stage. "People should not have to prove wealth before they are treated with dignity." Arthur Bennett slowly nodded in approval. Even Vivian Mercer smiled quietly beside the marble column. Evelyn looked around the room at the faces of people who moments earlier had supported her judgment without question. Now many of them could barely meet her eyes. But Clara never tried to destroy her publicly. That mercy made the lesson infinitely harder to escape. Damien finally removed the microphone headset from his collar, suddenly looking far older than before. Evelyn swallowed hard as her gaze drifted toward the hotel entrance where Clara had stood alone in the rain only an hour earlier. For the first time in years, she understood something no amount of social status had ever taught her. The most powerful person in the room had been the only one who never needed everyone else to know it. An hour later, the atmosphere inside the Grand Arcadia Hotel had transformed completely. The giant donor rankings had been removed from the ballroom screens, replaced instead with photographs of children whose treatments had been funded through the Whitmore Horizon Foundation. Guests who once competed for attention now sat quietly at candlelit tables listening to doctors, nurses, and families share stories about lives that had been saved because someone chose compassion over recognition. Clara Whitmore sat near the front beside Arthur Bennett and Vivian Mercer, still dressed in the same cream sweater and charcoal coat she had arrived in earlier that evening. Nothing about her appearance had changed, only the way people finally saw her. Nathan Holloway sat several rows back typing notes for what would become the most widely shared article of his career, though he realized halfway through writing that the story was no longer really about wealth or scandal. It was about dignity. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood near the entrance with a stunned expression after receiving an official internship offer from the Whitmore Horizon Foundation. The older security guard beside him quietly shook his hand with visible pride. "You did the right thing," he told him softly. Ethan looked toward Clara across the room. "She did," he answered. Near the stage, Damien Vale stepped away from the microphone stand and approached Clara personally. For the first time all evening, there was no performance in his expression, no charm designed for cameras or donors. Only regret. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Clara looked up at him calmly. Damien swallowed hard before continuing. "I spent years believing elegance meant knowing who belonged in rooms like this." His eyes lowered briefly. "Tonight, I realized I never understood dignity at all." Clara gave him a small nod. Then perhaps tonight was valuable after all. Damien accepted the words with visible humility before quietly stepping away from the spotlight he once controlled so confidently. A few minutes later, Evelyn Carrington approached Clara near the ballroom windows overlooking the rain-soaked Manhattan streets below. Her voice trembled slightly now, stripped completely of the polished superiority she carried earlier that night. "I have replayed every moment in my head," Evelyn admitted softly, "and there is no excuse for the way I treated you." Clara remained silent, allowing her to continue. "I built my entire life around status," Evelyn said. "Around appearances. Around deciding who mattered before they even spoke." Her eyes glistened with shame. "And tonight I became exactly the kind of person charity is supposed to fight against." For several long seconds, Clara simply looked at her. Then she spoke with the same quiet steadiness that had carried her through the entire evening. "People can change when they are willing to see themselves honestly." Evelyn nodded slowly, tears threatening to rise now. "I hope I can." Clara gently reached into her handbag and removed the folded hospital photograph from earlier. She looked at the smiling little girl in the picture before handing it to Evelyn. "Her name was Lucy," Clara said softly. "She passed away 8 months after this photo was taken." Evelyn stared down at the image in silence. "Before she died," Clara continued, "she asked me something." Her voice remained calm, but the room around them seemed to grow still again. She asked why adults with so much money sometimes forget how to be kind. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly as the full weight of the night finally settled over her. Across the ballroom, the orchestra began playing again, softer this time, warmer somehow. Guests who once watched Clara with judgment now greeted her with sincere respect as she moved through the room. But the moment Clara seemed to treasure most came quietly near the end of the evening when Vivian Mercer showed her a recent photograph of her granddaughter smiling outside a hospital without oxygen tubes for the first time in years. Clara looked at the picture with gentle emotion and smiled silently to herself. Outside, the rain over Manhattan had finally stopped. Reflections of city lights shimmered across the wet streets below the towering hotel windows while inside the ballroom, Conversations no longer revolved around status or influence. And that night, everyone remembered that dignity does not need wealth to be recognized. It only needs someone humble enough to see it.